But I'm curious, did you engage actual think tanks? Did you talk to Spencer Overton at the Joint Center? Did you talk to Mark Morial at the Urban League? Did you engage any member of the Tri-Caucus for some of this research? And I have to say, I found it really telling that you champion people like Ronald Reagan and Dwight Eisenhower as folks who didn't, you know, bang this racial drum like Donald Trump does. And I think for a lot of communities of color, look, they may have been more articulate and less clumsy than our current president, but absolutely, their words were just as damaging. Their policies were just as damaging. You talk about Ronald Reagan, you know, not depending on people to, you know, use race as an issue, but he absolutely did that. He racialized the debate on welfare. He painted the black woman as the face of a welfare queen, even though more white people were on welfare at that time then in the 80s and still now. He campaigned on abolishing affirmative action. He wanted to roll back civil rights policies. He's responsible for some of the gun laws. He said citizens should not be carrying guns. He only did that after the Black Panthers took up arms legally to defend themselves. Dwight Eisenhower, you say, didn't do these things as well. Dwight Eisenhower is known for telling the Supreme Court these poor white folks are good people. They just don't want their white daughter sitting next to oversized Negroes. Those are his words. So the fact that those two people are your champions to show that, you know, these are good, righteous Republicans who never, you know, perpetuated those racial tropes, it seems a bit of a disconnect to me when you say those things, and I imagine to a lot of people of color across the country.
It would be. I don't actually recall making those arguments.
Oh, and it was in the excerpt of the book that you said, I could read the exact quote where you said that Dwight Eisenhower
that naked
and
appeals
Reagan,
to racial solidarity examined by Donald Trump are rhetorically opposed by these individuals. Sure, I did not examine their policies in the book as you suggest I did. However, you mentioned affirmative action, and that's important because philosophically in this book, inaction to positively discriminate, to rise up, sort of had a collateral damage effect of negatively discriminating, and that was sort of an accident, a sotto voce, and we didn't actually dwell on that. Negative discrimination has now become the point.
What is negative discrimination?
That classes, whole tribes of individuals need to have a comeuppance, a due sort of reckoning with their historical privileges that they know or may not know that they benefit from, and likewise to examine those who have been victimized by historical forces that they may either be aware of or not aware of. That is negative discrimination.
Now, are you saying whites, men, people that have been in is that who you're talking about, who should have their comeuppance?
A philosophy that views not individuals as individuals, but as people who inhabit tribes, who inhabit a matrix of persecution in which they might not even be aware of it. But this is a very powerful philosophy, taught mostly on campuses, embraced by things like the women's movement, exemplified by things like intersectionality, which demonstrate for individuals who may not be aware that they have varying degrees of prejudice that they either suffer from or benefit from. And that is a sort of philosophy that I think is toxic, because it forces you to think about yourself and the people around you in ways that make you believe you're not master of your own destiny, that agency is not.
Many people aren't masters of their own destiny.
Well, I think it's a toxic philosophy. I don't think
I think it's an accurate philosophy, and I think, you know, with respect, I think your outlook on this is a bit myopic and based solely on your experience, and doesn't extend the intellectual debate with people who haven't had your history. I think when you look at what I got from the portions of the book that I read is you draw this false equivalency between Trump's base, and you call them social justice. You know, I was curious about that, but I think you draw this false equivalency, and I think, you know, certainly there are economically disadvantaged white people in this country. I think the reasons why they're economically disadvantaged are very different from the reasons why some communities of color are disadvantaged, and I think it's really dangerous to look at the current state of this country without looking at it through the context of historical systems that put those people in that position. You call that victimization, but I call that reality for a lot of people.
Some of it is, but very important questions have been raised by social justice activist groups, including Black Lives Matter, which have demonstrated clearly that there are historical injustices that are at play and that we are to be aware of. But a victimization idea, an idea that meritocracy is above you or out of your reach, and that forces are at work to keep you down and that you have no agency over your own life, is preached by white nationalist groups as much as it is by the left.
Well, I think it's a very nuanced argument you're making. I actually respectfully disagree with a lot of your points. One thing that stuck out to me is your context that you draw racial hoaxers, as you call them, and I think that's kind of dangerous to put out these days. Obviously, you can probably recount 3 or 4 incidents that were proven to be false, but then you think about the long list of things that actually happen or the crimes that go unreported. When you think about how maybe people of color view this in the context of, you know, you have all these people who were treated violently by law enforcement, like Joe said, and today the top Republican on the House Judiciary wants to have a hearing because they don't like the way Roger Stone was arrested, that he was, you know, treated poorly, but they say nothing about a 12-year-old child, Tamir Rice, being shot, or nothing of Laquan McDonald, or things like that. So I think sometimes that your argument comes across a bit reductionist and ignores some very important historical context. And we can talk more about it. I'd love to. This is a 3-hour conversation. I think we can have.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope people read the book. But